Hey everybody, this is Minion Soldier, and this is the Piracy Show. Now we are continuing on with discussing ships from the anniversary sale. Now, broadly, we dealt with capital ships, the responsibilities that come attached to them, the possible expenditures that come with them as well, and the possible hopes for them. Now, I do realize that I leaned kind of heavily on the negative side of things, but I wanted to make sure that, for someone who's going out there and spending that amount of money, I want them to really understand that there's some good potential out there. But once again, the emphasis and underline and italicize and bold type potential. There's a lot of things in Star Citizen that have potential. Whether or not that potential gets realized is kind of a different story. And a lot of that stuff with the capital ships is really kind of up in the air. But that's not so much true of the smaller ships in Star Citizen. The light medium to the medium ships, those tend to be some of the ships that do have the strongest showing in the game right now. And you can start to build a pretty strong idea of how these ships are going to perform in the persistent universe. Now, I'm very famous for saying, well, I wouldn't say I'm famous, but I'm known for saying that I'm not a fan of fighters. Now, that's not entirely true. I'm a fan of heavy fighters, because heavy fighters, things like the Vanguard and something that we're going to touch on in just a moment, these things do give certain capabilities. The Vanguard gives you the capability, no matter which variant you pick up, it gives you an interior, it gives you a place to store armor, weapons. You can even put a couple of little cargo crates in there. They don't have distinct cargo spaces that you can buy items from, like a vendor table and then dump them they automatically get dumped into your ship. They don't have that. But if you have to pick up like a beacon or something very light for a mission, you have that space. You can do that. Also, a bed, facilities, things like that, they kind of tend to be things that we don't really need in the PU right now, but those of us who are a little more in tune with some of the mechanics in Star Citizen are realizing the importance of these things. And that's why a heavy fighter like the Vanguard, I'm pretty pleased with. There are still some limitations. There are still some issues with the Vanguard. I think the fact that the nose weapons are still non-directable and they're fixed is kind of not the greatest thing in the world. I would like to see that changed in the future, but overall, it is a very strong suite. If you're going for a fighter, I kind of like the heavy fighters, but there is a new kid on the block that I would like to talk about. Crusader Industries Ares. You have two variants. You have the energy weapon based Ion, which is in the upper right of this image, and down in the lower right, you can just barely make it out. We'll get a clear view in a second. The Inferno, which is ballistic weapon based. These two have a very large size 7 gun mounted fixed on them. Now, to my knowledge, these ships lack an interior. They also lack the capability to change out these weapons, so it's not like you can go like, oh, well, maybe I want to do this one with this type of weapon. It's built in, it's part of the ship, but it is a size 7 gun. Now, a lot of the things that we've been talking about recently in terms of fighter viability over the long term in Star Citizen, with with this idea of players now having to transition from Arena Commander to Star Citizen and now realizing that it's kind of a different game. And you see a lot of videos and a lot of complaints out there about ship combat. CIG recently touched on that with the speed problem comment, and I made a video about it talking about how you really can't dull down the speed in Star Citizen because the vast distances that we're forced to cross would be vastly too punishing if we were all trapped below 300 meters a second. But when you think about combat and you think about having to pursue perhaps a Cutlass or a Constellation at very high combat speeds, most fighters, you're like, ugh, that it's kind of a losing proposition. You better hope that you have a whole bunch of friends to help you out in trying to take that ship down, to interdict or intercept them, depending on how your fighter is classified this week. With a ship like this, you can see how this would really kind of change the game in terms of pursuing ships like this. This could really kind of give you the opportunity to really drill down some of those bigger ships, especially in the situation like the Ion, which has, I believe it's 3 shield generators. The Inferno has 2. There's some real potential there to devastate or at least cripple an opponent when you're having to pursue them if you have a ship like this. Even at high SCM speeds, you figure you chase them down, you decouple, and you can start hitting them. It might be, you're going to be taking some hits as well, but you're in a bigger and heavier ship, so it kind of, I would say, it would probably even itself out. So if you're really thinking about going out there and taking down the Cutlasses and taking down the Constellations and things like that, when you want a fighter that opens up those doors, this really is that fighter. And I mean, some people might say, yeah, but it's going to suck against other fighters. Well, the same principle applies as, fighters versus the heavy ships. And I think that, for a Gladius, a couple of hits from a size 7 would prove far more devastating than a couple of hits from a couple of size 2s and one size 3 is going to prove for the Ares. Now, in the last episode, one of the things that we talked about was the fact that turrets are going to be something that is going to come online probably sooner than later. And turrets do change the nature of a lot of ships in Star Citizen. Take this ship here. This is the Constellation. Now, there are many variants of the Constellation. Their equipment varies here and there. A little bit here, a little bit there. There's so much to catalog, and I'm not going to dedicate an entire video to the Constellation, because one of the things that probably many of the people who own this ship did, regardless of what variant they own, or in most cases owned but have since gotten rid of, is that it's a hunk of crap. This has been one of the biggest disappointments in Star Citizen ever. It's really just a terrible ship. You remember when I was talking about the Mercury and I was gushing over how great it was, how great the view from the cockpit was? This is the antithesis of that. This is, this is the villain of the story, really. This was one of the earliest ships in Star Citizen. This goes all the way back to the beginning, and this was lauded by many members of the community. It was like, oh, this is going to be the Millennium Falcon of Star Citizen, and none of it proved to be true. However, even this horrifyingly terrible ship can somewhat be rescued in the eyes of players when you think, oh man, I can put a couple of NPCs in those turrets and I can decouple the ship, and it does move at a fairly decent pace, and it's got a little fighter to defend it as well. This makes this ship a lot more interesting. It's still crap, but it's much more interesting crap. And the idea of putting NPCs in turrets, it does really change the nature of the ship and how you look at the ship. And this really is the bottom of the barrel. And now it's kind of like, okay, yeah, it's kind of interesting. But let's look at something that's a little bit more interesting than that, and a lot better looking. Now, we move on to the Corsair, which by the time of the release of this video, it should be Drake Day, so you might be able to actually go out and get this now. This is a ship that, when we talk about something making the NPCs being able to make the Constellation interesting, when you kind of extrapolate that onto a ship like this, things get a lot more interesting and a lot more sexy looking too. If you think about it, what can you really trust NPCs to do, really? We touched on this in the capital ship video. Obviously, probably the best thing that you can trust them to do is ban turrets on your ship. Now, the side turrets on this ship aren't the best. It isn't the best idea. I still feel that should be just one single turret mounted on the top with quad size 2s. That is my opinion, but that's kind of how I feel about it. But when you think about a ship like this, and you think about the realities of 6 Degrees of Freedom and the amount of firepower that this thing is going to be able to bring to bear on an opponent that it's pursuing, as we were discussing with the Crusader Ares, This is a very, very interesting ship. Now, there's probably going to be a few prices paid in terms of resilience, but I think that what early adopters have kind of spotted, and what the people who are going to kind of jump the hype train on, later, is when they come to realize what all that firepower means in the persistent universe. This is a ship killer. This is a hunter killer. This is a very, very dangerous ship. And I mean, if you're pirating, I would look at this as something of an ideal. The best part about this ship is that I would assume that this is really around kind of that optimal area where NPCs and a solo player can work together to make a really damn good ship. This is kind of where I feel that ceiling is. Other ships, they get a little bit more complex, a lot more workstations, a lot more problems, but this, I could easily see this being a one-player top-end ship. And obviously, it comes with all the built-in facilities that you need, the ability to carry a vehicle, carry cargo, everything that you might run into in the persistent universe. This ship probably can bring somewhat of a solution to that problem. This is a ship that opens doors. It's not a ship that opens only a few doors and then closes all the others like a traditional fighter does, or like other ships do. This is a ship that opens a lot of doors, and that's why I really like it. Now, this is another ship that I would actually like to talk about, the Retaliator. The Retaliator has kind of come full circle, and it has kind of become interesting to me. One of the things that we talked about in the capital ship video, of course, was the Retaliator and the potential that is here. Now, there's a lot of things that are kind of up in the air. Currently, torpedoes on the current patch are heavily nerfed. And I think that has to do with player hijinks during the anniversary sale with all the free flies going on. CIG doesn't want these things getting blown out of the sky, and the Retaliator is certainly a ship capable of doing that, especially in the much larger ships. Its ability to attack from range, its ability to deliver a lot of firepower are already somewhat known within the persistent universe, certainly this and the Eclipse. There's a lot of facilities here. There's a lot of room for weapons, a lot of room for beds, but not a lot of room for creature comforts. But the truth of it is you are going to see capital ships in Star Citizen, and not all of those capital ships are going to be owned by you, more than likely. And you may have to deal with them in a somewhat permanent fashion. This is kind of the solution to that problem. I'm not entirely sure where torpedoes and being able to shoot down torpedoes is going to fall. I feel that tactics is going to play a heavy role in that. The capability of, multiple pilots working together and distracting or overwhelming a larger ship for a time so that someone can get the torpedoes in and on target while the gunners are otherwise occupied. A lot of that is going to be critical to this ship's success, but certainly, unlike the Connie, I know that this ship gets a lot of guff and a lot of trouble for its interior, which is less than ideal, but I think that there is some serious potential here. I think that in the future, as capital ships become more prevalent in Star Citizen, the stock on this thing, at least the bomber variant, because remember, there's a bomber and there's a base variant, and it's important to tell the difference. The bomber comes with the torpedo bays. The base variant, you have to purchase that, and I'm not even sure if you can still purchase the torpedo bays separately now. And I don't think that you can buy them in the stores and in the online shops in Star Citizen right now currently either. So it's very important to differentiate those two, but I think that this ship is going to become a lot more interesting in the future. Now, I'd mentioned earlier that the CIG has nerfed torpedoes, and they have nerfed the big old size 9 torpedoes. But I don't think that that's something that's going to stick. I think that that's a temporary measure. I just cannot see torpedoes staying as nerfed as they are. it would kind of kill them. So I think that is, the reason behind that. But you can see that most of the other stations on the ship, in fact, I think all of them except for engineering, are turret stations. And this thing is bristling with a lot of turrets to defend it. They're all over the ship on the exterior. So I think that I'm not, this is something that I am going to experiment with in the future. This is now something that is sitting in my hangar. I've kind of, jockeyed a few things around because I want to do some experimentation with this ship. Because this is something that has become, at least in my eyes, interesting to me. The interior is kind of a problem, and I share in your disdain for it. But I feel personally that the potential is there, and that is something that I am definitely going to be exploring in the future. Now, of course, we've also done recent episodes on the Mercury Star Runner, and we've talked about the different variants of the Vanguard many times before, but these are some of the highlights. These are what I would consider the logical ceiling for me of what a player can operate and succeed with brilliantly in the Star Citizen universe as a solo pilot. I think that this is really where, at the end of the day, most of us are going to kind of fall. This is where most of us are going to kind of go, you know what, this is where I want to be. This is the ship that I enjoy. It has enough features and it has enough things to kind of go along with it. This, when you think about all the realities that Star Citizen brings with it, all the complex game mechanics that we're supposed to get, and even some of the realities that we're now having to deal with in the Star Citizen universe, just the basic ones, I think that it's going to be ships like this that are really going to be where most solo players are going to go, you know what, that's my solo ship. When you think about NPC-controlled turrets, the potential and the stock on these ships goes way up. And really, I think that, there's always going to be the fighter enthusiasts out there. And I'm not trying to, damage their view of the game or their expectations or their enjoyment. I'm just saying that realistically, I think at the end of the day, when everything is said and done and all the chips and all the cards are on the table, I think that this is where most players are going to gravitate, is these types of ships.
Thank you for watching. So if you want to keep up with the latest and greatest in Star Citizen and Squadron 42's development, please follow us on our social media channels. See you soon.